Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our session, Leading Responsibly in an AI-Powered World, presented by our special guest, Professor Aravinda Garimella, Assistant Professor of Business Administration and R.C. Evans Data Analytics Scholar, and Deepika Chhillar, doctoral candidate at Geese College of Business, University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. My name is Alexander. I'm a part of the higher education team here at Exec, and I'll be helping to moderate today's session. But before we begin, I have a few brief housekeeping items for our audience. First, all attendees are in listen-only mode. However, we encourage you to engage in the session by asking questions, which you can do using the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel. Please make sure to use this feature for all the questions you may have for the presenters, while we invite you to use the in-chat feature for sharing any thoughts you may have with the rest of the audience. We'll be having a formal Q&A session, so please feel free to send in your questions throughout the session. Additionally, we're recording today's session, so you can look forward to receiving a copy of the recording via email in the coming days. And now, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Kate Deering, Assistant Director, Recruitment and Admissions, Geese Graduate Programs Online. Kate?
Thanks, Alexander. Hello, and welcome to our Ivy Exec webinar today. As Alexander said, my name is Kate Deering. I'm an Assistant Director for Recruitment and Admissions at Geese Online Programs with the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I look forward to spending the next hour or so with you. Since our presenters represent Geese College of Business, I did want to give you just a little bit of a brief overview of what Geese Business is all about. We offer 3 online master's degree programs, a Master's of Business Administration, a Master's in Accountancy, and a Master's of Science in Management, as well as 8 brand new graduate certificates that combine 12 credit hours of transcript credit in topics like strategic leadership and management or accounting data analytics, plus 6 other ones that we've recently. Geese graduate level programs are innovative, they're very affordable, and they're designed to be specifically online to offer a real flexibility and access for full-time working professionals. Today, you are going to experience a conversation between one of our talented instructors and a current doctoral candidate and be able to get a glimpse into what kind of content and research is happening within Geese. Our graduate courses balance foundational material shared on the Coursera platform with an interactive high engagement component from Illinois as well. That high engagement component includes a live class each week and many other facets to learning, like group projects, faculty office hours, networking, and just being part of a great university like the University of Illinois. If you want to learn more, I'll drop our email in the chat. Okay, I'm so excited for our fireside chat today, Leading Responsibly in an AI-Powered World, where we're going to discuss the very timely topic of how to leverage AI for skill development and how to lead organizations' approach to AI responsibly. I'm excited to introduce 2 fabulous individuals who are going to lead this discussion. Aravinda Garimella is an Assistant Professor of Business Administration and R.C. Evans Data Analytics Scholar at Geese College of Business. She has an undergraduate degree in computer science from the Birla Institute of Technology in India and a PhD in information systems from the University of Washington, Seattle. Before pursuing a doctoral degree in information systems, she worked as a technology and management consultant with clients in the telecom, healthcare, and public sectors in Asia and Europe, where she led several digital transformation projects. Her work helps practitioners design better and more equitable digital platforms and systems for communities and organizations. Her research stream is Responsible AI and examines AI-enabled task augmentation and how algorithmic inputs influence human decision-making in financial markets, social media, and consumer relationships. Through her research and teaching, she is working to advance the role of ethics in the design, deployment, and management of algorithms in society. She also is a narrative fiction writer, which I didn't know, and she enjoys exploring technology's transformational impacts on society through short fiction. Deepika Chhillar is a doctoral candidate at Geese College of Business. Her main research stream examines how organizations can become socially responsible towards their stakeholders, especially as they navigate the demands of existential modernism and upholding ethics. She draws on theoretical traditions in organizational theory, strategic management, and artificial intelligence. Across the breadth of her research, she seeks to address existential concerns about humanistic futures for organizations and the economy. She draws from a toolkit of computational and quantitative methods and hopes to contribute to the field through the spirit of engaged scholarship. So I'm so excited. I know that was a mouthful, but we have some great presenters here, and I'm going to turn it over to Aravinda and Deepika.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and we thank you and Alexander for your support in organizing this event. Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending online, for being here. Ari and I are delighted to have you here. Hopefully, this will be an enjoyable 1 hour. We are planning to discuss this very relevant and very timely topic in 3 sections. So the first will be about the technology itself. The second will be about implications of AI on individuals. And lastly, we will have a conversation about how organizations can deploy and manage AI responsibly. So while we still have human experts here in this very important area, we have the privilege of having a fireside chat with them. Let me begin this conversation with our expert here, Ari. So hi, Ari. You know, the first question, the very fundamental question that we have for you is that AI is something that everyone sort of knows about, and not everyone fully understands what is classified as AI and what is not. So to start with, the very basic question, fundamentally, what is artificial intelligence and how is it different from other technologies in the past and today? Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Deepika. And also thanks, Kate and Alexander. Deepika, it's fun to talk to you about this. We grab coffee and talk about AI all the time. It's nice to do it on a webinar. Let me first give an intuitive definition, one that is useful for a conversation like this. So intuitively speaking, the ability of a machine to perform cognitive functions that we associate with human minds is what we call artificial intelligence. So what could this look like? This could look like prediction, decision making, even things like creativity recently are what we typically associate with human minds. When a machine can do these things, we call that artificial intelligence. You know? But because, as you said, you know, sometimes there's a little bit of confusion about what is AI and what is not. There's a tendency to call all software AI sometimes, right? And all technology AI. So maybe I'll give a little bit of a technical definition also from 2 perspectives. First is this diagram you can see here is called the Turing Test. It was developed by Alan Turing in the early 1950s. So, you know, we think of AI, we've been listening to it a lot about it in the last decade, a couple of decades, but it's been around a while. The fundamentals have been laid many decades ago. So Alan Turing came up with a very elegant test to classify what's AI and what's not. So in this diagram, you'll see there's C is the tester. C is a human tester, and A and B, A is a machine and B is a human, and they're behind closed doors. And C is sitting outside and having a text conversation with A and with B. The idea behind the Turing test is if the tester, C, cannot distinguish via a text conversation who the machine is and who the human is, then that particular machine is said to have passed the Turing test. Right? So Turing test has been heavily studied. Even you know, there are many papers analyzing it, critiquing it, but still till today it stands as one of the most intuitive ways to know what is AI and what's not. But a little more of you know, what is AI and what's not in terms of, because there's also a tendency that wherever there's automation, we call that AI, right? Anything that's automated, not done by people, we think that's AI. So I want to make a little bit of a distinction that in modern days now, when we call AI, what is that? So there are 2 types of algorithms. One is rule-based algorithms. In rule-based algorithms, we as in humans come up with the rules or the logic, and we have the computer apply that logic on data and give outputs or predictions. For example, if the problem is, should an applicant be granted a loan? Then we could come up with our own logics. The credit score should be above this, maybe, right? Maybe their income should be this many times the loan they're asking for. And then we can apply that on data and it can give predictions. This is also an algorithm, but these days when we're talking about AI, we're talking about learning algorithms. And what we mean by that is learning algorithms go one step further. We can come up with some initial rules and the algorithm makes a prediction, but then you compare that with something called labels. Labels are what happens in reality. This is what we call ground truth. So for example, with the earlier loan granting example, if you had data on who actually defaulted loans and who didn't. So let's say the algorithm predicted someone would not default on a loan, but they did default, or vice versa. That's what a label is, what actually happened in the world. Then you compare the predictions with the labels, and here's the learning element that's so central to AI. The rules are modified as time passes. And when I say modified, the algorithm is modifying the rules itself without human intervention. So that's really what we are referring to as AI, at least in these days when we call learning algorithms are what is AI.
That makes a lot of sense. So with that explanation, the natural question would be that, so Turing test has been around since you said about 1950s. What in your opinion has changed in the last few years, in the last decade, I would say, with respect to the capabilities in AI, and particularly what has changed with generative AI, which seems to be, which has taken over the world in some sense. So do you have thoughts on that?
Right. Yes. Generative AI is on everyone's minds now. So let's talk about that. What AI has come a long way since, as I said, in 1950, the Turing test was developed. Since there were many major milestones. In 1964, MIT created the first chatbot, AI chatbot. We're using AI chatbots now. The very first one was actually called ELIZA. It was created at MIT in 1964. In 97, AI defeated the world champion Garry Kasparov in chess for the first time. That was also, every time something like this happens, we reconcile with how powerful AI is becoming and can become, and that has implications for how we manage it. Then came Roomba, Siri in the early 2000s. A chatbot called Eugene in 2014 passed the Turing test. As in 1/3 of the judges could not determine if Eugene was human, or actually thought Eugene was human. And in 2017, AI beat a human at Go, which is an incredible accomplishment because there are 2 to the power of 170 possible positions in a Go game. So these were some important milestones. You asked recently about generative AI, what's going on with that, right? So generative AI has had the impact it has because it's creating content that is very believable as created by a human. Right? It's very close to what human content is. So it relies on, and I'll give a semi-technical explanation here, one that's useful and, hopefully something that audience can learn from, but also, is intuitively, easy to understand.
Yeah, sure.
So this is the architecture underlying generative AI is something called GANs, Generative Adversarial Networks. So there are 2 key parts to this architecture. One is the generator and one is the discriminator. So both of these components are created separately, and they are trained separately, and they have different roles. The generator's job is to take data from the world and create content. Now that could be images, that could be written content, that could be anything. That is novel. Right? We'll talk about that in a little bit. Hopefully we'll get to that part. But it is novel and it looks almost like it's been created by a human, right? That's the job of the generator, and it's trained to do that. The discriminator is checking, and the discriminator is checking whether something's created by AI or by a human. It's trained to do that. What this the architecture of generative AI does is it puts both of these in competition. So the generator is trained to do its job very well, and the discriminator is trained to call out the fake from the true. And the discriminator over time starts giving feedback to the generator to improve by saying, on a scale of 1 to 10, this is how much I believe this was created by AI versus a human. So it's because of this architecture that generative AI is as strong as it is today. And is able to create content with, the kind like ChatGPT, being AI. When you talk to it, it can feel many times that you're talking to a real person. Mm-hmm. An underlying architecture of that is something called large language models, which are powered by this kind of technology.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. So this is mind-blowing, as well as, it is definitely going to alter our professional and personal lives at the same time in a big way, right? Something that is human-like, but in fact does not have all the sensibilities as does a human. So in what ways do you think people and AI, or humans and AI, can work together in such a setting? Because it's definitely going to be here for a long time. So what are some ways that it is altered, or what are some ways that we can work together with AI?
Right. So there are different ways to classify this. I'll talk about one that's most relevant to the question you're asking. Humans and AI can broadly work in 3 ways. So one is task substitution, which means a task in which AI is replacing a human. This is happening. It's already happening, right? Automatic cars, self-driving cars are replacing drivers. This is an example of task substitution, right? One of the jobs that's at threat of being replaced by AI is copy editors, right? People are heavily using things like ChatGPT and Bing for copy editing their work. These are examples of task substitution. Task augmentation takes the approach that relies on the fact that humans and AI have complementary strengths. So humans have something called tacit knowledge, right? Which is like sometimes we know something, but we don't know how we know it or why we know it. This kind of intuition and other strengths like being empathetic, AI may not understand your joke, right? AI may be able to generate jokes based on content out there, but a genuine understanding of humor, sarcasm, these are all, one would hope, still human qualities, right? So task augmentation, what it does is you place AI and human to do a task together that leverages their complementary strengths. So AI does one part and human does another. An example of this could be how recruitment's happening these days. AI takes a first pass at the resumes, screens if they meet the minimum criteria, and only then a human looks at the resume. I'm not saying this is good or bad. It depends on how it's implemented, right? If the AI is only doing basic checks, maybe yes, but a lot of good candidates are getting screened out because of a human never even looking at their resume, right? So these have to be designed carefully. And task assemblage is a little more advanced. It's when humans and AI work kind of together almost seamlessly. Whereas in the medical field now, there are technologies where doctors can wear, body suits that are intelligent or have devices that they work with that almost act as extended limbs for performing surgeries. So this is an example of task assemblage. So these are the ways in which human and AI could work together.
So it sounds like a lot of integration is going to happen, or already has happened in the case of task substitution, at least. So what are some skills that individuals can focus on in today's world to still be relevant, to still stay at least with the AI, if not, one step ahead? So what are some skills that individuals should focus on in this increasingly AI-powered world? So, yeah, is the big question.
Right, yeah, it's a very good question. You're asking what skill is important. As AI is so pervasive, and large language models and chatbots are becoming so good at what they do. What skill is then integral? What's important, right?
Right.
So my take on this is that what's happening with these large language models is that information is everywhere. Even with Google, information was everywhere. But with AI chatbots and generative AI, the access to information has become so much easier, right? Information is everywhere. So when answers become so ubiquitous and easily available, then what becomes really important is the ability to frame good questions. So I've been thinking a lot about this ever since, generative AI, like the last year or so, especially, it has made some pretty big advances. So even as an educator, I have to think about what to teach in the classroom. I think that the most critical skill at this point is how to ask questions. There's a book called Warren Berger called A More Beautiful Question. This is not a new idea, by the way. The fact that questions are very important is not some brilliant new perspective, but I think it's going to be extremely important in the generative AI era to learn how to ask good questions. There's a childlike quality. When we are children, we tend to ask a lot of questions about the world. Somehow, as we become adults, we stop doing that. When we get answers, we're satisfied. We don't want to ask more questions, but we need to break that pattern, because now, imagine everybody has access to answers. What's going to be the differentiating factor? Who asks better questions, right? You give the same AI chatbot to two people, what they can do with it is very different. And speaking of questions and answers, another way to say this is the art of conversation is going to be very important. Because the way we talk to humans, everybody has different styles, and with your style, you can get more or less information from a person. That applies to these large language model chatbots too. That's why prompt engineering is such a big field now. Prompt engineering, the idea is that you can create prompts that get better outputs from AI chatbots, right? There's a technique called chain of thought prompting. Chain of thought prompting means you don't just ask the chatbot your question. If it's a complex reasoning question, you kind of build up to it. You make it do a small part. You make it do a small part. You give more information. You give more constraints. You say, go read this material. And then you pose your question, whereby you're enhancing the AI chatbot's ability to help you. So the ability to ask good questions, the art of conversation. And speaking of the art of conversation, I want to say that there is a tendency to frame good conversation as a fixed attribute in people. We tend to call people, oh, this person's a good conversationalist versus this person's maybe not so much. So I want to, refute that a little bit here, because conversational skills can be taught. It's just that we, for some reason, de-emphasize that as we grow older. We emphasize the technical more, or just getting to answers quickly. But the art of conversation is something we need to train people on at this time.
That's a fantastic approach, like asking the right questions, being a better conversationalist. So relatedly, actually, in your role as an educator in one of the larger Midwest universities, one of the Big Ten universities at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, what skills do you think you need to impart to students in your classroom? And are you doing something differently, given that we are in the age of generative AI? So it's a related question. And I know these are all sort of mega questions, so you can feel free to approach it any way you like, but this is something that almost all educators and all teachers might be thinking all over the world, so to speak. Yeah.
Thank you, Deepika. It's a very important question. So I teach a programming class. I teach business undergraduate students coding, right? And many of them have never coded before. So I've thought about how generative AI impacts this. So in general, I want to say that with generative AI, what's happening is that you can even create entire code. You can just put a problem statement and you can get snippets of code that you can work off of. There's a new Visual Studio released an AI version. I was looking at it last week. If you type create a box plot, it's already giving you the basic syntax. You can go and tweak it the way you want to. So what's important? What's the important skill if all this is happening? My feeling is that fundamentals are more important now more than ever. Let me explain. Fundamentals are always important. Why are they more important now? If everybody, the barrier to learning coding has dropped so much. So it's not really about how much syntax you know. You can know it in a second. You don't even need to know it. The AI, the interface will give you code that you can play with. So what's important is, much before all this generative AI, I've been teaching this programming class for 4 years now. And some of my students, they come into class with a fear of coding. They've never coded before, and they have this mindset that maybe I'm just never going to be able to code well. A lot of people have that kind of a phobia. So what I do on the first day of class is I don't have them open their computers at all, even though it's a coding class. I have them break a complex problem into small subparts using art supplies. And then I make a point to them that a good coder is someone who can do this, who can break a problem into subparts, rather than necessarily someone who knows more syntax, right? And I think that kind of training is more important now. Fundamentals are what's going to distinguish strong students from others. And I'm talking about coding, which is a skill-based kind of technical course. This is even more the case for subjective courses. Like, let's say you're teaching a course on ethics, leadership, or strategy, then all the more the case that this is the case, right? Another thing for educators to think about right now is how they want to use AI in the classroom, whether, for what, and how. So there's a lot of resources on this. If you see Ethan Malik's, he's a professor at Wharton. He writes several articles for AI in education. And there's multiple ways, like you can use AI as a tutor, AI as a mentor, AI as a teammate, AI as a coach. So there's a lot of material on this that, where you can get ideas from. But each educator needs to make their own decision on what aspects of their course AI is suitable for and in what role, and think about what aligns with their own pedagogical approaches, their own philosophy of education, right? What they think education is for. What is not a good idea is silence and inaction, and just let's see what happens. Because whether we talk about AI or not in the classroom, students are already using it. So not talking about it is not doing anything, they're using it. But if you take a more active approach, a coaching approach, you can guide students. So for example, in my coding class, I want them to face the struggle that one faces with debugging a piece of code. That's how you learn. That's how you become a good coder, is having sleepless nights over not being able to debug a piece of code. I want them to have that struggle. But if they want to use AI for some other aspects, I want to encourage them to use that. So this kind of an active approach is what I think educators need to take at this time, rather than not talking about it or sidestepping the conversation.
Thanks. That makes a lot of sense. So while we're still talking about the individual level impact, let's talk about the dark clouds for a little bit. So in popular media, in social media, we hear this a lot, that there are, we should be wary of the generative AI age, and it's going to be harmful for some people. So the broader question to you is, what are some things to be wary of and to be cautioned about, and who is it most harmful for? Who is being most affected by these changes?
Right. Yes, and a lot of my research focuses on that. As a responsible AI researcher, I do think a lot about the harms to society if AI is not managed properly. So some obvious ones, like I just spoke about, over-reliance, for example, on generative AI can cause an atrophy of core skills. So people have to make conscious decisions. What do I want to use AI for? And what do I not want to use AI for? Then there's misinformation. It's not that it's been there with Google, also powered by algorithms, but now with generative AI, the new threat is that information is so easily accessible. It's very tempting. It's so easy, and it's conversational in nature. So misinformation is likely to spread very quickly. An important thing to remember is that we tend to think of AI chatbots as something other than us, right? We are chatting with a chatbot. We are here, the chatbot's there. But actually, what an AI chatbot says is just going to be a mirror of current society and of our history so far, right? Where is it going to get data from? Whatever variations it's making, that data is coming from the real world, right? So AI will be a mirror of society, and the risk is that whatever vices exist in society, whatever biases exist in society, those will only be more codified and strengthened if we don't actually intervene and design these systems very carefully. And finally, of course, speaking about dark side, right? Property rights there's right now a lawsuit, writers versus OpenAI. I think it's in progress, where it's not clear the content that is being generated by generative AI, which all artists' work it's benefiting from in music, in writing, in visual art, right? So there's an issue of property rights. The problem with even handling a lawsuit like this, I'd be very interested to see where this goes, is that there are currently no legal frameworks to even assess something like this. For example, the writer's lawsuit, it depends, the legal argument it's depending on is fair use, the fair use argument. But fair use laws were written when these things did not exist. So how to interpret those laws for this time is a very big challenge for legal scholars at this time. Right. So in a sense, there are a lot of, challenges, and the problem is that AI is advancing at a pace where the legal and governance frameworks are not yet in place and are not catching up. There's a total mismatch there, right? And speaking of governance, Deepika, I know that you have a very interesting work in this area. For the audience, you may or may not remember from Kate's introduction there, but Deepika is a doctoral candidate here at GEES. We're very proud of her. She does very interesting research which examines the relationship between organizational performance and social responsibility using computational science. And I do know that you have one paper, Deepika, I've read that paper with a lot of interest, where you talk about, AI governance and why is, in your opinion, I talked a little bit, what's your take on why is the governance of AI very important and critical right now?
So I'm glad, thank you, Ari, for that, those kind words. First of all, I think you are also in the camp where you think AI should be regulated, right? Like I'm turning it to you for a moment, but unequivocally, are you in that camp?
Yes, AI should be. I believe AI should be regulated. The question is not whether, the question is how. Right. The question, to me at least, is not whether, considering the harms at stake to society. Yeah.
Right. So that makes that is the approach that we take in that paper as well. So why is it important now is the question you asked me. So to just to summarize some of what you've said and also what our understanding is from that from the research in that paper, three fundamental things have changed so far. So first is the scale and the velocity. So the scale at which data is being collected today and the velocity with which there is development, the processing capabilities of algorithms, and the speed at which these AI applications are entering the market and coming into our homes. Take Alexa, take Echo, take Siri, ChatGPT. Everything is approaching us with a lot of speed and velocity, and there is scale of data collection. That has changed. Second is the self-learning part of the algorithms, which you briefly touched upon in the first few answers. That was earlier, the algorithms would have a deterministic outcome. So there are rules, there are codes, there is data, you provide an input, say, for example, a calculator or a regular phone, not a smartphone. That also had algorithms in place, but the outcome is deterministic. You know what's going to happen based on the rules. The self-learning capacity of these algorithms is what has changed. So they're learning in real time from the data that you and I provide as users, and that generates outcomes. That are then the third point of difference is that the outcome is sometimes opaque, even to the creators, even to the experts. Forget other users like all of us. The people who are creating these algorithms can also be opaque, can also be blind to why this output exists. So it's a little opaque as to what is the actual approach that the algorithm has taken to arrive at this particular answer. So just to summarize, so the scale, velocity, there's self-learning part of the algorithms, which is new. And the third one is it's opaque to most users. And so these are the reasons why we need to contain, or we need to govern the use of AI and AI applications.
Yeah, that's beautifully put, and I couldn't agree more. And I like the way you singled out those three, characteristic elements of kind of what's going on right now. And again, because I like your paper so much on this topic, maybe you could, share with our audience. Also, we've been speaking about governance for a while. Since you are an expert in this area, maybe you could just first give a definition to us. What is governance? And also then maybe, I remember in your paper, you spoke about the different forces at work and also the trade-offs to be considered in the governance of AI. So could you just speak to that a little bit?
Sure. So the governance of AI basically applies to earlier technologies as well. So this is a conversation that truly began when internet was a new thing. When internet came, there was a similar shift in the paradigm, in the sense that things were, so usual ways of working was disrupted, heavily disrupted, letters, the paperwork, etc. So with the governance, when we're talking about governing a technology, whether it's the internet, whether it's AI, it's the structures, the processes, mechanisms, and strategies. So there's 4 ways that lead to the production and implementation of formal as well as informal rules. So there are rules in place. Sometimes they're formal rules, legal rules, and sometimes they're informal rules that direct and regulate both the AI applications as well as its distribution. And then there's accountability. That's the most important part in my understanding, because you cannot keep technology behind bars, right? If there is something that goes wrong, who is accountable? Is it the CEO at the top of the the technology, that's the technological firm, or is it the manager, is the coder itself? So where is the responsibility? And so wherever there's a lack of clear accountability, there is a higher chance of things going in the gray area and still no one being held responsible. So this is in short a formal definition. With regards to what are some ways, like you mentioned, the important question is how. So in our paper, what we discuss is that there are 4 governing forces, or governing modalities is what we call it. But essentially, these are 4 different forces that govern in each their own unique way. So the first one, and the most clearer, simpler to understand, is the law. So regulatory force, which is basically any sort of institutional policy that is enforced by legal authorities and the government. The second one is market. So imposing financial costs and penalties whenever something goes wrong, and then also rewarding good practices. That's what the market does. For example, Apple has been bet heavily on this. So if suppose a company like Apple has sort of released its approach and strategy in the market, saying that we are going to be handling user data very carefully, and your privacy is the most important thing to us. They are betting on the fact that if they forego some profits with the advertising companies that they might sell the secondary data to, they will still have enough users to compensate and even overcompensate. So more users will be attracted by Apple products and still purchase that. So that's a market force, that's the economic incentive to do something right. That's an example. And the third one is social norms. So the societal expectations that legitimize such good behavior. So whenever there's, suppose, for example, there is a self-driving car that crashes and that is condemned, even though right now, today, no one goes to jail, no one is responsible, there will be a time that someone will, hopefully, but and hopefully there'll be a time where there won't be such crashes as the technology develops. Of course, there are hiccups, but in the meantime, the societal expectation is that it shouldn't happen, right? And there is condemnation. There's in the media, in popular media, of course, but also lawmakers are thinking seriously about it. So that's the societal expectation and legitimization of good practices. And the fourth one is, of course, the architectural design constraints, that is changing the software, the algorithm in the AI application itself in such a way that it is not biased, it is not misbehaving in unintentional ways. For example, you mentioned hiring algorithms. Sometimes our resumes are not even seen by managers, they're filtered through AI applications. And so if it's lopsided towards a particular type of candidate that has been successful in the past, it shouldn't be so that the others are at a disadvantage. So designing the algorithm itself in such a way. So these are the kind of the four forces here. Now there are trade-offs, of course. You know, whenever we try to contain any technology, there's always going to be a cost associated. Nothing is ever free. So the first trade-off here is between governance and innovation. So do we need, as a society, do we need more governance, or are we going to benefit more with more innovation? Is our humanity and society going to advance more with that or versus this? There's secondary considerations like very related to it. Will we benefit with the government surveilling on its citizens a lot more to ensure security, to ensure national security, or should we contain that? And individual privacy and individual security is their own responsibility. That's another question. Another trade-off is distributed versus concentrated power. So right now, all of our data is mostly utilized by the few four big tech firms, for example. That's concentrated power, right? Because they are the leading experts in AI.
Right.
All the monetary benefits, all the benefits of data collection, having historical data in their records is going to them. And so for smaller players, smaller firms, small and medium-sized enterprises, it's a challenge. And for, of course, users like us. The last one is about algorithmic efficiency versus fair data practices. So you need more and more data to be collected to develop better and more efficient algorithms, but it comes at a cost of fair data practices at times. It's not always known to the users that they are under surveillance, that their data and their privacy is under threat. So these are the kind of dichotomous choices. I want to turn it so I've been speaking for a while also, but after this paper, we were thinking that these are four trade-offs, but what if there is a way to balance this, to have this middle path, so to speak, for organizations, and how can they navigate these trade-offs in a responsible way?
Right, and that's the million-dollar question, right? Because there are multiple stakeholders. They all have their own incentives, and they all have their reasons to lean on one or the other side of these trade-offs, right? There's also something to be said about, which is not said enough, that in some cases there is no balance, right? There's just no balance in some cases. And we have the difficult question to ask is, what should our organizational leaders do when there is no balance? You know, that's where you need some strong leadership. I think when we talk about strong leadership, usually we talk about people doing bold things or saying loud things, right? But with strong leadership can be in the form of recognizing that there's no balance and stepping back. Let me give an example. A few years ago, the CEO of IBM, Arvind Krishna, he just said IBM's pulling out of the facial recognition technology business. They had invested quite a bit by then, right? And the logic was that we are simply not in a place where we can deploy this technology in a way that doesn't harm some sections of society. So facial recognition technologies, they boast very high levels of prediction accuracy, but they perform very poorly on some demographics, and especially on young Black women. So sometimes there is no balance. And at that time, in my opinion, it's the role of leaders to admit that and accept that, and then maybe put a pause, right? We don't have a pausing culture right now. It's always a race, right? It's always a race. You saw how after ChatGPT was released, how quickly the others released their products. They all had them ready, right? But there's a race. So yeah, I know, Deepika, you also study corporate purpose, right? So what's your take on this? Like a little bit of a pause and a balance, and balance not existing, and sometimes, making decisions that can seem a little difficult to take, and having to pause this way. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely it's a tough one for organizations and managers out there. I think what you said, the example you gave about IBM CEO, that's a really good example of this concept of organizational mindfulness. So corporate purpose is basically not a panacea, but it sort of is. It's the middle path. It's how organizations can stay true to their own goals, which is of course includes making profits. But at the same time, they can have long-term success with following the right principles. That's the power of purpose, is what I advocate in my dissertation, and that's the path that a lot of scholars and practitioners and media is also supporting. The way that to do that is to attract the right kind of stakeholders, the right kind of employees will stay with your firm, and of course, companies are have a very good chance of losing talent if they are not, if they do not align with the expectations of employees and other stakeholders that are part of the ecosystem. Ecosystem. And so corporate purpose is one way to go about it. Organizational mindfulness, which is definitely a tougher path. As you said, the IBM CEO had to definitely take a little bit of backlash in the short term, probably. But in the long term, that might be a successful strategy to keep the right talent, to attract the right kind of customers, and to make it a success, that field would be successful in the long term when so that those are the kind of things, and those are tricky, especially with the kind of pressures that organizations and board members have, and of course the CXO level has. But that's one possible way to stay true to their purpose, organizational purpose.
Yeah, no, this is great points. I really liked what you said, in particular about attracting the right kind of stakeholders. There should be some intentionality behind that, and that's of course to do with how much you really want to stay true to your values as an organization, right? Yeah.
Right, but I was thinking that these might be easier to implement, these kind of principles and this middle path. It's a great philosophy, and there are ways to formalize it. But I think that might be easier with kind of a responsible AI framework. And I know that you are one of the leading experts here. You are a responsible AI scholar, and I know that you have research in this area. So would you like to share some responsible AI frameworks that organizations can leverage, and also talk a little bit about your research in this area of responsible artificial intelligence?
Yeah, sure, Deepika, and I think that's a good last bit to talk about in today's webinar before we, hand it over to Kate and Alexander for questions. The frameworks are still getting built. There are some good ones that we can borrow from. The current frameworks are at the level of principles. Like, what are some good principles to embrace in the creation, use, and deployment of AI? Some of these come from EU, from the European Union put out guidelines for trustworthy AI. The White House they just released a blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights as well. And there are some good ideas in there. I know some scholars who worked on that. There's something to do with like consumer rights, for example. When, for example, that people have a right to know when an AI is making decisions about them, right? So I can share what I put together based on my understanding of, from reading all of these different frameworks and synthesizing them. These are some of the core principles that are in common, kind of overlap across them. So accountability, you spoke about accountability, right? Who's accountable? When a decision is good, who gets credit? When a decision is bad, who gets blame, right? And this is particularly important. ProPublica did a very good investigative journalism piece on Compass, an AI algorithm that was used to predict recidivism, the likelihood of recidivism. And it was found that it was biased against Black defendants. So who's responsible now? Like the AI that's advising the judges, it's not clear. So as you said, when you spoke about governance, this accountability idea is so important. Then bias consciousness. I like the word bias consciousness rather than bias free or something, because it's a more realistic a realistic ideal to strive for. Nothing in the world is without bias. No program is without bias, and no human is without bias. What we need to be is to be aware of these biases so that we can account for them in our eventual decisions, right? So bias consciousness is also an important principle. Inclusion is the idea that does AI work for everyone, or does it work only for some segments of people? We spoke earlier about facial recognition technology, who it works for, who it doesn't work for, that kind of thing. Actually, yeah, you asked about my research. There's an interesting research project I'm working on in this area with colleagues here, Professor Tiffany White and another colleague at the University of Pittsburgh, Priyanka Gunaratne. What we are studying there is, when the effects of informing consumers, that an algorithm is being used, and also inviting them explicitly to give input on how the algorithm works in the decisions it makes for them. These kind of inclusive strategies, we want to measure the impact and document them, which we think could be useful for firms. Then there's transparency, which is becoming, as you said, spoke about opacity of algorithms with deep learning, with neural networks. It's not clear how AI algorithms are arriving at the decisions they are. So some kind of an insight for end users on how the AI algorithm works. Another project I'm working on with a colleague here, Erin Hassan, is we are seeing fake news flags on social media are known to be ineffective at best. Sometimes they backfire. People believe it more if there's a fake news AI flag. So we're seeing if offering explanations along with an AI prediction makes people more likely to, disbelieve fake news and believe not fake news. Then there's civic mindedness, which is the idea of what's good for society, what's the impact of this overall on society, on people, on their skills, on their jobs, on their, how they see themselves, their identities. And then there's the idea of human oversight, which is no matter how good an AI is, just leaving it into the wild is never a good idea. Incorporating human input in every stage of the process, not only in the end. Bottom-up process involve humans in the development. The idea of algorithm auditing is also slowly increasing. It needs to pick up pace more, where you have your algorithms audited by an external party so that they're checked for biases. Right? So these are all some of the important ideas in the responsible AI framework, and they are things that organizations should be thinking about if they're deploying AI.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful. We have had some questions about responsible AI in the chat as well. So this is a great framework organizations can sort of emulate or adapt to that. And thank you for sharing your research. So with that, I thank you, Ari. Thank you, Kate. And thanks, Alexander. We are open to Q&A. I think we have about 10 minutes, so we might be able to take 3 to 4 questions. Please feel free to post them in the chat, and Alexander can pose it to you, Ari, and for us both to discuss. Thank you so much.
Well, let me thank you both of you. We are very honored to have you present for Ivy Exec crowd today. It was a very informative and knowledgeable presentation, and myself really enjoyed, as I believe our attendees as well. And so we have received a couple of questions. First question says, who sets formal and informal rules, and how to ensure it continues to apply transitional and cross-regional to minimize misissue?
Okay, could you say that one more time, Deepika, because I had some difficulty with the audio there.
Sure, if you don't mind. So I can begin with so who sets the formal and informal rules? I think we spoke about governance as being formal and informal rules, and so who sets them, and how to ensure that it continues to apply to across boundaries, across national boundaries, and across cross-regional areas to minimize the misuse of it. So
okay, yeah. So I will answer this in 2 ways. I'll say who's setting it now and who I think should be setting it. So one, right now, it's not really, everyone is doing whatever makes sense to them, right? Organizational leaders are just learning what they can and trying to, if at all, because there's always the conflict with profit motive, profit maximization. When that's at odds, people are not even setting any rules, right? So Right now, most of it is informal, really. The formal is a little bit in the form of, when there's strong leadership at the top, and if that kind of culture percolates fully to the bottom, people are seeking out algorithm audits, and those auditing companies are setting some formal tests of whether you pass the test for responsible use of AI, right? And I spoke a little bit about the formal earlier too, that there are governments like the EU, the White House is also trying to come up with something. The United Nations, I heard this week, is putting together a committee on this as well. So there is that in progress. Who should be is also a very important question. In order to ensure the responsible use of AI, this is a Herculean task. This is not an easy task. We need to bring people from different areas across boundaries to determine what is the right way to use AI. This is not one person's problem. This is not the problem of tech companies. So it's not ideal that we live in a world where OpenAI is coming with its own framework. That's good. I'm glad they're at least doing that. But we need inputs from legal experts. We need inputs from ethicists, right? Earlier, I spoke about biases, right? AI algorithms are in a way that sometimes when you reduce one bias, another one increases, because you're optimizing on different, without getting too technical, you're optimizing on different objectives. Who decides what objective to optimize on? That's not a technologist's problem. That's an ethicist's problem, right? We need philosophers, we need sociologists, we need economists. And we also have a tendency to create solutions in silos. Academics are just talking to other academics and coming up with solutions. People in organizations and companies, they're doing the same. What's happening is the people who are most harmed by AI are out of the conversation. So the solutions, formal and informal, should be formulated in a bottom-up approach where all these people that I talked about, who understand different parts of this problem, should actually talk to people who are most affected by AI, incorporate their inputs, and work together, transdisciplinary across boundaries. That is how we have any hope of, ensuring fair and equitable use of AI, because at the pace it's going at, we don't have a shot if we continue to work in silos. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So basically, to summarize, like you said, cross-pollination of ideas, speaking across silos, and transdisciplinary approach to this, and maybe governments and national and international bodies can facilitate that, a forum for such things.
Yes.
That's a great
Yes.
question and a great answer that you gave. Okay, so maybe we can move on to the next question.
Yes,
Alexander.
thank you very much. So the next question says, how can businesses actively contribute to a tech future that serves the public interest and benefits society as a whole?
Okay, so how
That's
can
an excellent question. Yeah, that's an excellent question, and it's a question that whoever asked, it's one I wish more people asked this question. More people held leaders of organizations responsible for creating a future that's more aligned with public interest. So I touched upon some of these things. I will talk about those, and I'll see if I can add something new there. Being clear about your purpose and values as an organization. Deepika spoke to us about corporate purpose, right? So being clear about what you stand for as an organization, what is that constraint at which you stop thinking only about profits and think, as a firm, am I completely moving away from my values, right? How much am I okay to create harms to society or do things that are the detriment of society? For example, let me give an example. Actually, this is best explained through one example. Look at social media these days, right? Look at the content it pushes. It's extremely polarizing content. Why is it polarizing? It's not that these companies particularly are taking joy out of polarizing, right? There may be some people who make that argument, but my own take is that the reason it's polarizing is they have only one objective: engagement, because profits are tied to engagement. That's their business model, right? So when engagement is your only motive, then what are you going to do? You're going to put all your horses into that race. How can we maximize engagement? If that's harmful content, you don't care. If that's negative content, you don't care. You just want to maximize engagement. What if you can create, a business model where it's a profitable business model where it's just not only engagement that drives this, right? So we need innovative business models to come up in order to address this, right? And there are different models, by the way, people are proposing. It's just that, we need more of that to ensure that tech companies are there is an enthusiasm, and I understand there's an enthusiasm around technology. If anyone gets this, it's Deepika and me. We both are computer science engineers, right? So whenever there's a new technology, it's like a new toy. There's the novelty effect. How can one not be excited about it? But in our enthusiasm to play with a new toy, we cannot create damage that will be hard to come back from. And this requires intentionality, it requires mindfulness on the part of organizations, and it requires clarity in the leaders on the top on what our values are. What are those lines we are not willing to cross? But I think if you're in a race and you're not willing to re-examine your values once in a while, mistakes are bound to happen.
That makes a lot of sense.
Okay, well, thank you one more time for this wonderful presentation, for sharing your wisdom and knowledge with Ivy Exec audience. We truly appreciate the opportunity to have you present. And I would also like to thank you all for joining us today. As mentioned at the beginning, we have recorded this session and we'll make sure to share the recording of the webinar in the coming days, so you can look forward to receiving an email of your own. And I just want to wish you all a great rest of the day and stay safe, everybody.
Thank you, Alexander. Thank you, Deepika and Kate. And thanks everyone for coming today.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.